Ari Lewis Show.
All right, welcome everyone to today's episode of the Ari Lewis Show here on IsraelSportsAndNewsRadio.com. Thank you for joining us. If you'd like to email the program, you can do so at arilewishow@hotmail.com, or you can email the station at IsraelSportsAndNewsRadio@gmail.com. There's a big fight underway. I don't know if people have heard about it. Billions of dollars are on the line. Yes, I'm not exaggerating. It happened this Motzei Shabbat, Saturday night, May 2nd in Las Vegas. On the line to tell us more about it, he is in Las Vegas right now as we speak, covering the fight. He has a lot of great information to give us. The author and the director of Split Decision, the story of Guerrero Redondo, Brin-Jonathan Butler. Brin, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I didn't know where to begin. Now, you're in Vegas right now. You just finished attending a press conference. I know a lot of these press conferences are run-of-the-mill. They're a bit boring. Did anything exciting happen at this particular press conference?
I think there was about 75% of it was thanking the corporate sponsors, thanking each other. It was as inspiring as it sounds and as exciting as it sounds to hear the owner of Tecate talk about what he brings, to the event, that Tecate will be the sponsor, and, just how excited he is, as well as Jose Sulaiman's son talking about the Emerald Belt, who the victor will be taking away. I know you must be thrilled knowing that
yeah.
There's a belt with 400 emeralds on it for some reason that the victor is going to take. So it was just as absurd as everything else.
All right. You were there. Let's talk about, since the press conference is not so riveting, I know because of Facebook, but this is your cover for now. You ran with Manny Pacquiao, I believe it was yesterday. How did that work out?
It was a few days ago.
Okay.
A few days ago, I was supposed to meet him at the base of Griffith Park at a canyon trail, and he changed the location at the last second to Bronson Canyon Trail, which leads all the way up, takes about 35, 40 minutes if you're running to get up to the Hollywood sign. And there were about 60 of us, I think, who started at the base. And in the end, I think after 10 minutes, there was 3 people with Pacquiao and the dog. Pac-Man is the name of his little terrier, Jack Russell Terrier dog. And 5 minutes after that, it was just Pacquiao and the dog. Nobody could keep up with them. They were just so fast. Incredible incline to get up to the Hollywood sign, and he did it without really breaking a sweat or being out of breath. It was really impressive, and it was probably the most exciting thing I've seen from the lead up so far to this fight. Was just he is taking it more seriously than any fight he's ever had, and he has hundreds of Filipinos who show up and follow him wherever he goes, and they just have a look that really felt reminiscent of Zaire with Ali, and I am not quick to jump to those kind of comparisons. I don't know that I'm cynical about all this, but it's a fight where certainly I think win, lose, or draw, the hero of this story is money, and that is not terribly inspiring from my point of view. There's been virtually no subplots in the lead up to the fight, other than you hear about the live gate surpassing the Super Bowl's live gate. The pay-per-views, the sponsorship, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's going to break every record there is, but you're not hearing very much about this fight. And so when I watched Pacquiao run up that hill, and I was running right beside him for as long as I could until he shook me off, I think about 10 or 12 minutes in, there was just that wow factor of, this guy's on the way to fighting the biggest fight in history, at least as far as money is concerned. And what happens if it's actually an exciting fight? When the bell rings and he's staring across the ring at the toughest opponent he's ever faced, and Mayweather's doing the same thing. The 2 best fighters in the world are staring at the best opponent they've ever faced, and they don't quite know how their styles are going to fit. There was just a lot of excitement for that moment, running with him until I couldn't keep up, and nobody else could either. So it was pretty magical.
Now, we talked about all these people that are following Manny Pacquiao. He's got a big entourage, if you will. He's been always notorious for that. Mayweather, with his training, I know he likes to have a lot of fun, but my understanding is he has had his most serious camp pretty much up to date with this particular fight. Is that what you've heard as well and what you've noticed and seen?
I was outside Mayweather's gym for 6 hours 3 days ago, and he was there. Originally, we thought he was on his way to entering with one of his luxury fleet of vehicles. There were 5 designated parking spots that his security detail of 9 men, who I think weigh a total of 3,500 pounds, are always following him. And they came out of the Mayweather gym, which nobody was allowed to enter. It was cleared out so that Mayweather could come, and it turned out he had come through the back. And nobody was alerted that that had happened. And over the course of 3 or 4 hours, one luxury car after another, $250,000 or even more with each car. We assumed it was him. It wasn't. It was somebody else. And we went, oh, okay. And the last 2 were Mayweather's girlfriends and that kind of thing. And then we were waiting for him to come out. And the security team, with this sort of rigid, cold-blooded, nasty way they had, despite most of the people, maybe 100 people were gathered outside. Many of them were kids, just hoping to get something signed or to see Floyd. People had portraits of Floyd, posters. He, in the end, left out the back door, which he came, and everybody felt completely ripped off, only to have it compounded by Floyd sending somebody out the front door to sell T-shirts. So it
Wow.
was as emblematic an afternoon, and it was roasting hot. I mean, today it's 96 degrees outside
Wow.
in Vegas, and so everybody was sore. There was nowhere to sit. The security detail was saying, move, there's a bus coming, get away from there. You can't stand near this. The area is really ugly. Vegas is Chinatown. The Mayweather gym is sandwiched between kitchen supply store, patio furniture. There's a betting advisory firm. I mean, trying to imagine, I think this, that, Muhammad Ali just opened up a museum over in Louisville, to sort of revisit the racism he experienced in his youth, walking into a diner and somebody saying, "What do you want, boy?" and that kind of thing.
Right.
The amazing thing about Floyd Mayweather, and this is the first time I've ever seen him, is on this trip. I've never seen him in person before, is spending 5 hours feeling as ripped off as everybody there. As you think, if he wins this fight and he wins it spectacularly, and there were ever a museum for Floyd Mayweather, the entire museum is just a gift shop. That's the only thing that his legacy would inspire, is trying to sell ugly, very ugly T-shirts and socks and this kind of junk that just looks so garish. And seeing kids dressed up in TDE, the best ever, whatever, it's depressing. It's really, really depressing. So who knows how this is going to end up, but that's my little snapshot of spending 5 hours sunburned outside of the Mayweather gym.
So Mayweather, who is the man of the fans, as he likes to say, sneaks out the back door while kids are waiting for him just to get a glimpse. He didn't want to deal with that. Again, this is the Ari Lewis Show. My guest is Brin-Jonathan Butler. We're talking about the fight. Brin's in Vegas right now. Now, you posted a picture of Mike Tyson. He's at the MGM Grand. I understand there is also this Hollywood aspect to it where apparently I was told that you have Mark Wahlberg making a bet with P. Diddy. Mark Wahlberg likes Pacquiao. He visited his camp. We know there's celebrities that went to Pacquiao's camp and Mayweather's camp. Talk about that aspect. We know in general for a big fight, celebrities come anyway. This all the more so, the biggest fight in history in terms of money. Have you seen any celebrities outside of the picture of Tyson, anyone else around Vegas that did anything interesting or just wanted to show up and make an appearance?
Pamela Anderson showed up in an Escalade early on to when Mayweather had announced that he would be arriving, which I think was 2:30 p.m. Pam showed up. She walked to the door. She wasn't permitted in, So she went back to the Escalade and waited for an hour, and they just stood her up. She just left after an hour, just giving up. So that was kind of an interesting thing, and almost nobody really recognized her. Pamela and I share the same hometown in Canada, so despite the fact that she's changed a little bit over the years, I did recognize her, despite the fact that I don't think she's been a relevant celebrity at a boxing match since she attended Tyson McNeely some 20 years ago, if you can believe it. It was 1995 for that fight. I guess speaking to your question, there has been, I have heard, 15,000 press credentials requested for this fight, which I've never heard anything close to that. Ringside seats now, one is listed for $350,000 for one seat. So, according to those kind of metrics, there has just never been anything like that. I mean, you're talking about owning clear title a house in most states in the United States for the privilege of spending 3 hours in a seat. So, it just leaves you kind of speechless, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the Lakers in their heyday with Shaq and Kobe to get floor seats for an entire season were under $1,000, just to give the fans some perspective. Now, we talk about all this money, press credentials, celebrities, but there was an ESPN story about a week ago saying the fight was not signed last week, and it recently got signed. Is that true?
Yes, it's been signed. Today was the last press conference. There will just be a weigh-in. It's the last time that Pacquiao and Mayweather will see each other face-to-face, I believe for only the third or fourth time in their lifetimes. And then the following day after the weigh-in is the fight. So there's not much left to do besides getting on. Both camps have been very low-key in terms of provoking or trying to throw any fuel on the fire of subplots for this fight. The fight has completely sold itself. And it is interesting because as somebody who's here writing a 15,000-word article on this, it does give a lot of trepidation as far as I have to file the story 3 or 4 days after it happens. And if the fight is a stinker, it's one thing. If the fight is electrifying, it's another. If somebody, Pacquiao sprains his ankle in the second round and it's called off, it's quite another. Whether it'll be buyer's remorse or whether it will be the thriller in the Manila, those kind of questions lingering when really only 1,000 seats, I believe, have been sold to the public. Everybody else has been looked after. So it's just a very bizarre energy. I mean, today I was walking over to the MGM Grand for the press conference, and you walk by Bullets and Burgers where somebody can tell you to fire a grenade launcher for some amount of money. And it's just everything here just seems a little bit crazy, and I just don't think I'm intoxicated enough to be in on the joke.
Well, okay, so several things have been signed, so it was a great line, and then you have the weigh-in, but I guess my point is that with the article on ESPN last week, was this fight really close to not being signed? Because we know the history of Bob Arum and Floyd, all that kind of stuff. I guess I'm bothered by the fact, or I'm confused, how both fighters had a training camp for about 7 weeks when the fight wasn't official. Is that something that's that abnormal in boxing?
It is abnormal. I think there was a tremendous amount of acrimony between the two camps. And that was the only interesting feature, actually, at today's press conference was Showtime's executive sort of saying, thanks, Bob, for your appraisal of how good HBO is and how good your fighter is. We have the best fighter, and the best fighter fights here at the MGM Grand. And Pacquiao, quite conspicuously, has been staying at the Mandalay Bay Hotel. So There was some talk about just how hospitable the Mandalay Bay was. It was just endless shilling for products. It all felt like corporate thank yous while everybody in the audience fell asleep. None of us care. So all we want to hear about is the fighters and have the fighters talk or the trainers, but it was just endless, glad handing between them. So I think that acrimony has sort of, at least for me and some of the other reporters I've spoken with, led to the conclusion that any hope that there will be a rematch to this fight is highly unlikely. Despite how much money is there, this is probably the best we're going to get. We're lucky that we got this at all. I think Floyd's diminishing returns with pay-per-view, his last few fights, kind of forced him into it. I don't think he wanted the fight. And Pacquiao had some terrible pay-per-views against Chris Algieri. I mean, they're not releasing a lot of those numbers because they were so poor. So I think they kind of needed each other. And I think the other thing that is really noteworthy about this fight, there's not going to be another fight like this or anywhere close for a long time. Nobody is on the horizon to sort of pick up the mantle of being able to participate in a fight that captures anybody beyond diehard boxing fans. And one of the surprising features, I think, is that casual sports fans or not even sports fans don't really seem to know much about this fight. And that surprised me.
Now, let's go. You mentioned the point we won't see anything like this in a long time, but as far as the money level, because when Ali fought Foreman, they both paid $5 million. Then you have in the early 80s Cooney and Holmes being paid $10 million.
Pro Football Talk
set the bar where eventually in the 90s guys made $20-30 million for fights and later on $40 million. So the fact you have one guy or both guys making at least $100 million, does that mean the bar gets set for the next mega fight that now the next guys say Floyd and Manny made at least $100 million apiece, we want $100 million apiece, or will the fights just dip down and it'll go back to $5-10 million, what have you?
I can't foresee, I mean, the rhetoric that you've been hearing from Arum and several of the other people associated with the fight, this is tremendously good for boxing, and with a rising tide, all the boats will be lifted. There's no reason to believe that. Boxing is 1% of the participants in the sport are consuming 99% of the revenue. It's way ahead of the curve of a country that is, in a dire situation where income inequality is concerned. Boxing is unbelievably ahead of that curve. And if, you're for a winner-take-all economy and casino capitalism, boxing is where it's at, far above any other sport. And so I would, as I say, there's just not characters that exist to sort of pick up the slack. I think after these two are gone, both these guys are really up there in age, with Mayweather at 38, Pacquiao at 36. And even after the fight happens, does anybody want to see Mayweather fight somebody other than Pacquiao after this? I mean, where does it go but anticlimax? So they're in an interesting situation, and Mayweather only has one more fight on his contract. He's been really clear and explicit with everybody he's associated with. That's the end. He wants to retire. As you say, they're both making 9-figure paydays, with Mayweather, some estimates say as high as $180 million he could earn, with Pacquiao making $120, with a 60-40 split of the total revenue. So, what were these guys earning before this fight? I mean, nowhere near what they're earning here. Some of these hotels were built for $400 million, and they're about to share a purse for that amount. So it's very surreal, and yet, it's interesting to sort of speculate about where boxing goes from here, because, I mean, the real future of boxing is the fact that it's moved to television, which is totally in the control of Al Heyman, who, of course, is the quote-unquote advisor of Floyd Mayweather. So I think TV is the real future of boxing and is the last hope and gamble for it becoming a mainstream sport again. Not this fight. This fight is totally anomalous, and I think will remain anomalous for the foreseeable future, decades, probably.
Again, this is the Ari Lewis Show on IsraelSportsandNewsRadio.com. Thank you for joining us. Our guest is Brin-Jonathan Butler. We're talking about the fight, Manny Pacquiao, Floyd Mayweather. Keith Olbermann of ESPN brought up an interesting idea. Keith's a little crazy from time to time. No one's going to do this, I assume, but he did call for a boycott of the fight because of Mayweather's history of domestic violence. You're talking about at least 12 charges. I want to know if that was discussed among the press corps at all, and if there's any chance there'll be some little group that will boycott the fight because of Floyd's past. And also, do you see Floyd somehow fixing this domestic violence issue he's had, or does he end up like O.J. Simpson or someone else who just keeps committing these crimes and getting away with it?
Yeah, and being emboldened to commit more and more crimes that escalate in intensity, which is something we've seen since the crimes we know of that he's committed dating back to 2001, five women with 7 separate incidents, as well as his most recent ex-fiancée who claimed that she lived a life of abuse at the hands of Floyd, including having guns pointed at her and being attacked. Boxing has a lot of this, and one of the things that I think people neglect is if you go back and you compare Floyd to the great fighters of the past, Sugar Ray Leonard, Sugar Ray Robinson, I think he has more in common with them as a domestic abuser than he does as a fighter. Sugar Ray Leonard, to use his term, beat his wife senseless. Sugar Ray Robinson's wife left him after suffering numerous miscarriages that she attributed to the beatings that he laid upon her. So I think you're astute to point out the O.J. Simpson analogy is, pound for pound, Floyd's rap sheet at this point in his career, and he hasn't left boxing. I mean, these guys historically don't really fare that well after they lose the spotlight. Floyd has a far more extensive resume than O.J. Simpson did to lead him with his insecurities, in a sense of entitlement to go the direction of an O.J. Simpson is scary to forecast, but if anybody was auditioning for a role in the 21st century of O.J. Simpson, I'd have to say in sports, it's Floyd Mayweather Jr. And, that definitely is palpably felt for this fight. And, it's very disturbing. It's very troubling. And to answer your question about that changing, I think to change and fix his behavior, he would first have to acknowledge it. And he is consistently referring to his victims as alleged victims. He cites that there's no photographic evidence of his assaults, unlike Nicole Brown Simpson, Rihanna with Chris Brown, despite the fact that the police did retain photographic evidence of Josie Harris, his baby mother, being assaulted, copiously documented in the medical records that she suffered a concussion and bruising. So I think all he would have to really do, you or I are advising him, is it that difficult for him to hold a press conference and to say, I grew up in violence. My father beat me endlessly. I witnessed my father beating my mother. I grew up in violence. And, I've unfortunately had some difficulty coping with conflict in my life, and I've made some terrible mistakes that I'm ashamed of. I need to grow up. I need to be a better man. I need to atone for the damage I've done. I'm a role model. Me being given a pass for domestic abuse could lead to, thousands of women potentially being abused who wouldn't otherwise be by men who think it's okay. And some of those women could be beaten to death. Like Josie Harris said that if her son hadn't called the police on Floyd Jr., that she believes she quite possibly could have been murdered that night. So the stakes are real here. It's not just the optics of it are so scary. There are real people at risk with the actions of this guy because of his position in society, and a lot of media outlets are just giving him a platform to smear his victims, where even they allege that even they refer to documented victims that Floyd has been convicted for assaulting as alleged victims. And I think they should be held accountable for that. I think it's disgraceful and totally irresponsible, and they're just trying to maintain their access with Floyd, in my view. And it does a real disservice to people who call themselves journalists. Katie Couric interviewed Floyd and allowed him to just smear victims of domestic abuse by saying, there's no documentation. Well, there's a huge amount of documentation about his history with violence.
That was pretty well said. I mean, that would be the right idea for the press conference. Of course, that would take humility on his part. I don't really see that happening. But I remember a few years ago on my show when his prison sentence was delayed so he could fight Miguel Cotto because he was considered so important to the Las Vegas community, the money, that they delayed his sentence. And that does not happen with the average day person. They get sentenced to jail, they go to jail right away. So he has been given special treatment, as we see from his past. And one thing, part of the reason I bring this up He's undefeated professionally. If he loses this fight, I feel like it would send him in such a tailspin. He wouldn't be able to go with it, and I'm concerned what would happen after that. So if you just touch upon that aspect, if that were to occur.
I think Ari, that's the most interesting aspect about the fight, and I think the most analogous fighter in boxing history to compare him to is Roy Jones Jr. Roy Jones Jr. retires after winning the heavyweight championship, coming up from middleweight to heavyweight championship, something nobody's done in history. Had he retired after that fight, I think he would have made the strongest argument that anybody's made since Sugar Ray Robinson that he's the greatest fighter of all time, pound for pound, for the accomplishments and the resume that he left behind. Instead, he came down in weight, won a controversial decision over Antonio Tarver, did have the guts to give him a rematch, and was knocked out in the second round savagely, knocked out cold. That, more than any other fight I can think of, even more than what Buster Douglas did to Mike Tyson, obliterated his reputation. He is not even the discussion of being a top 50 pound-for-pound fighter anymore, because he demonstrated he didn't have a chin. And he was knocked out cold, I think, within the year of him coming back to the sport. He's been knocked out again, I think, in the subsequent 10 years. He's still fighting because he needs the money. So I think if you look at Floyd, if you're a self-appointed best fighter of all time and you're better than Muhammad Ali and you're better than everybody because unlike them, you've never lost. The moment you do lose, you can be certain that people are going to not be especially generous in nitpicking a resume that has been, especially since he beat Oscar De La Hoya, incredibly selective and careful in who he's chosen. A lot of catch weights where he's fighting guys, a lot of fighting guys who are a little bit over the hill, just very, very careful. Now, I'm not saying it's not intelligent to do it, and if you or I were managing him, we wouldn't do the same thing. But I do believe that greatness has to largely rest on the shoulders of, I'll give you an example. I asked Freddie Roach about where he placed Floyd in the history of boxing, and he said not even in the top 50. Name one great fighter that Floyd looked great against. And it's a very, I think, interesting point because he's beaten some very, very good fighters early on. There were some exciting fights too. But he didn't look great against Oscar De La Hoya. He beat him, maybe. It was close. Did he look great against Miguel Cotto? No. It was competitive. He certainly didn't look great. Whereas if you look at Ali's resume, you look at Sugar Ray Robinson's resume, you look at, I kind of see him more as a modern-day Larry Holmes. They both have this phenomenal record. Where is Holmes in the history of boxing after losing to Michael Spinks, who Mike Tyson knocked out in 91 seconds? It's interesting trying to calibrate how you rate these guys, but you can be sure if he has a loss on his record, especially if it's a bad loss, a knockout loss, a definitive loss, I think a lot of people are going to say, he was at the right place at the right time. He was always in shape, fought really smartly, mitigated the risk at every opportunity. But fundamentally, how would he have done against Sugar Ray Leonard? In my opinion, I think Leonard would have done the same thing to Floyd Jr. as he did to Floyd Sr., knock him out, within 15 rounds. So I think that provides a lot of drama, and I think one possibility with this fight is something happening like if he's not able to really deal with Pacquiao's punch output and aggression, and Pacquiao fights to win every second of every fight. So if he's not able to really break the spirit of Pacquiao, which nobody else has ever done, if it's a drawn-out fight and Pacquiao wears him down round after round after round, you're going to see the drama played out on Floyd's face as he has to come to grips with the reality that his entire legacy is on the line. Pacquiao can be knocked out in the first round. His legacy is granted. Floyd, on the other hand, has made so many enemies and had such a carefully sort of selected resume that, his legacy is completely up for grabs with this fight. And I think that is really, really interesting, and how this plays out. So I think all the drama is there with what Floyd is bringing to the table. So that's what I'm excited to see is, maybe he can coast and win an ugly fight. Maybe he can win a definitive decision. He was standing and fighting against Cotto and Maidana in both fights. Is that because he's trying to make more exciting fights? Maybe, but most likely it's because he can't get away any longer. He's too old, and he has to, like Ali, adapt to life as a fighter with some diminished skills and diminished reflexes. And Pacquiao still was able to catch a young gun like Algieri, connect. I think he knocked him down 5 or 6 times. So it doesn't seem like he's lost much in terms of quickness, aggressiveness, and just a desire to, win every second of every round. And as I say, him marching up to the Hollywood sign, he did it pretty damn fast. So I think there could be some excitement with this. I have some hope that maybe Pacquiao can pull this one off.
Now, another interesting aspect is Mayweather, most of his career was trained by his uncle, Roger Mayweather, but this fight he's being trained by Floyd Mayweather Sr. He's trained him for a few fights. They've reunited. And you've talked about in the past, if you look at the Mosley fight, that seemed to have more of Floyd Sr.'s influence. That's where he got tagged very good and his knees shook. So Floyd Sr., is that going to be that much more of a detriment that he's training Floyd Jr. as opposed to his uncle Roger?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've understood 5 words that Floyd Sr. said, and I just talked to him yesterday for 10 minutes. I don't think he understands the nature of any question you ask him, and I mean, the question could be as pedestrian as, how you doing today, Floyd? And he still looks at you. He didn't seem to know what to do when I reached out my hand to shake his hand. He just kept holding my hand. I wasn't sure if we were sharing a moment, but it was still, can I not hold your hand longer? Can you release me, please, sir? And I don't think much of him. Freddie Roach said that he thinks that Floyd taught himself to fight, and I see a lot of truth to that. I don't really think much of their training methods. It looks pretty, but as far as strategy, I think Floyd made himself. He's a self-made genius in the ring. I give him credit for that. So I don't really foresee Senior giving him any kind of advice in the corner. I mean, what are his great accomplishments as a trainer? Not much. Roger probably has more success as a trainer. He had more success as a fighter than Floyd Senior. But I think it all comes down to Floyd, and it's on his shoulders to pull this off and to make the necessary adjustments, if indeed he has to. Whereas I think Pacquiao does have in Freddie Roach a tactician who, with well over 20 world champions, has somebody who's a major asset as far as making some changes and coming up with a really solid game plan. Doesn't mean I think that he should be favored or anything. I think Floyd has a lot of the advantages, and certainly when you see them on the podium, you're aware of the size disparity. I mean, Mayweather is a lot bigger than Pacquiao. Pacquiao is a little man, and as Floyd suggested, Pacquiao might be wearing lifts in his shoes while they're standing next to each other, so he might be even smaller when they get into the ring. But, I think it all comes down to Floyd.
Now, I want to go to the trainers because there's a lot of interesting stuff with them. Now, Floyd's trainer is his father, as I mentioned. Before we go to him, let's go to Pacquiao's trainer, Freddie Roach, who is not technically his father, but like a father figure. Pacquiao has said that many times. Other people have said that. We know Freddie Roach has Parkinson's. We don't know how much longer he has to live in at least a coherent manner. I just want to put that out there. So how much of that is a motivating factor for Pacquiao to kind of win this for his surrogate father, if you will?
I think it's a really big deal. I know we don't swear on your show, but Roach had a very amusing comment about my asking him whether he was doing a service to the sport to knock out Mayweather, and he said, yes, we're doing a service to the whole blank world. And I think Pacquiao has picked up on that a lot. Roach said some things that were pretty dark, and he said, Roger is in really rough shape in terms of health. And I've seen Roger at press conferences just not able to stay conscious while people are talking. And I mean, and these were conferences that weren't like Bob Arum pontificating about how Pacquiao had written a letter to ask for clemency for somebody on death row while 7 other people were executed. I mean, it was just totally bizarre and surreal and demented. And yet still put most of the people to sleep. Just everybody was yawning. I think I think what Roach said was, I've always hated Floyd Sr. and Roger. I don't care if they're dead, and they hate me, and I think that is the feeling between them. Is Roach does see this as a battle of good and evil. He does qualify that Pacquiao hasn't always been, to use his term, an angel, but that in terms of being a role model to the 100 million Filipinos and to a lot of people around the world, Pacquiao stands for some things that inspire us, and I think ask us to try and be a better person. And I feel that too. I feel that there is more of a positive light on Manny. I certainly don't see him as a perfect person or maybe even a good person. But I mean, if we were in his circumstances, which is pretty surreal, would we be good? I think there'd be endless temptation and tremendous pressure. I think on balance, he's done really well with that role. And I see the faces of the people who want to come see him, and they get something from him. He adds something to their life. And I feel exactly the opposite when I've seen people around Floyd. I feel sad for people who, are essentially apologists for him, because it's so evident how cynically he's exploited them to get their money. So I'll give them credit for getting their money, but in the end, I can't see much of him being relevant after he's gone, and I think most people will be very glad when he is gone. And I think almost all of us would be thrilled if Pacquiao is the one to help send him on his way. It's hard to. I don't pretend that I'm impartial about this. I'd love to see him lose his fight, and I'd love to see it be a notch on Pacquiao's legacy, because Floyd's gone out of his way to damage the sport. And as I mentioned earlier, I think his legacy is one that injures the country. Is bad. I think if you're measuring it by any other metric except how much money he's earned, it's an ugly mark, and I don't think that's the case with Pacquiao. And I think it would be good for the sport if Pacquiao's able to pull it off, and pull it off as an underdog would be exciting. It would be the greatest victory of his career, and maybe in some twisted way it offers Floyd his only path toward redemption. Is if his identity isn't being this perfect guy, and that justifies everything that he does that does so much harm, maybe there is somebody inside Floyd that's still the wounded kid who his dad used to, endlessly beat up and treat like garbage. And that guy can sort of come out and have a little bit more compassion for somebody other than himself. I don't think that's impossible. I think Floyd is a sensitive guy. But I think when he said to Manny Pacquiao at the press conference last week, once you lose, you can never get it out of your mind. Pacquiao's lost 5 times. He's never had a problem with loss. He was living in the street, selling donuts for a nickel, and his father ate the family dog, sleeping in cardboard boxes. Manny's lived and not just survived from numerous losses in the ring, outside the ring, hardships. His legacy is so inspiring because of what he's done in reaction to those losses, coming back even stronger. Just an incredible legacy. I mean, he was knocked out the same year. His first professional loss happened the same time that Mayweather had his last loss as an amateur back in the 1996 Olympics. It's been that long. And it's really the unknown quantity is what, as you say, what will Mayweather be like if he loses? What if he's not able to say, I'm perfect? That we have to sort of examine him as a person, as a man, as a fighter, beyond just that he's undefeated. And I've read a number of accounts that he wakes up crying after having dreamt that he was losing or he'd lost. So I think it's him who is obsessed with loss. And that's probably led him to be as disciplined as he's been and to fight as if he was broke. As Zab Judah said recently, watching him, Zab is his sparring partner this training camp. A lot of positives has come from it, but I think there's still like an open wound there that Floyd is nursing through this obsession with perfection. So again, it's just a facet that adds a lot of drama to the fight, I think.
Yeah, this is the Ari Lewis Show on IsraelSportsNewsRadio.com. Our guest is Brin-Jonathan Butler. We're talking about the fight May 2nd. Another interesting aspect to this, he has his father, Floyd Sr., train him. Even though his father abused him as a kid, they've had all this drama, and even though, as you talked about, his father doesn't really add so much to it. So how ironic as rude as Floyd has been and the domestic violence and all these problems that he's created and caused, that he still is nice and gives his dad a job. You know, there's a lot of Freudian stuff there, I assume, but your take is he doing it to be a nice guy? He loves his dad at the end of the day. He's trying to do something nice. Is there an ulterior motive we haven't thought of? I mean, how do you explain him having his father when his father doesn't really add that much to the fight?
Well, I think the father is really the key to Floyd's psyche. Floyd, quite famously, is known to have been dangled by the ankles in front of Floyd Sr. when a gunman, Floyd Jr.'s uncle, his mother's brother, stormed in with a shotgun and shot Floyd Sr. while he was holding Floyd Jr., who was hung upside down. So it kind of tells you maybe how he would define his own sense of self-worth in relation to how his father saw his worth, which is totally expendable, and you're the thing that I want a bullet to go through before it reaches me. And this is a father who was dealing drugs to his drug addict mother while he was a child. So I think my God, a psychiatric conference worth of material there just from birth to age 5, let alone, they had subsequent entanglements through the years. So I just think that, like a lot of unhealthy relationships, it's very hard to let go. Floyd Sr. was in jail for dealing drugs for 5.5 years of Floyd's career. When he turned professional, that's when Roger took over. They have a really unhealthy relationship. Floyd Sr. has endlessly tried to take credit for everything that Floyd Jr. has ever achieved. There's been a number of 24/7s where you've seen confrontations with them where they're in each other's face and threatening to beat each other up. It's quite interesting. One writer I interviewed mentioned that when he watched that, you could see the senior got into Junior's face. Junior seemed to flinch, as if, the scars of those beatings from the past, psychologically, there's still that pain there. There's still that fear. There's still that agony, that emotional trauma. It still exists between them. And yet I think there's a huge desperation with Floyd Jr., with all of his achievements, with all of his wealth, to say, I'm worth something. I am valuable as a person. Maybe it goes back to that time when he was the human shield for his father. Why would you do that to me? How could you do that to me, to put me at hazard in that way? Can't you see by what I've achieved that I'm worth something? I mean, that's my dime store breakdown of it. But I feel that from him, and it's like one of the only angles where I feel compassion toward him.
Right.
Not to say I excuse him from responsibility for all the negative things he's done, especially to women, but if you're trying to understand him, if you're trying to get under the drive that motivates him, I think from the passion, you always have to trace the wounds that are there, and that's what I've tried to do, is to try to understand him without judging him, which I do for maybe an hour a day, and then I go back to judging him, and but for that hour a day when I'm trying to get under him, I do feel really sad for what the guy's been through. Nobody deserves to have that happen to them. Before we even have conscious memory, Floyd's existence was fight or flight, and nobody deserves that. Everybody deserves to be protected from that, and he wasn't. And he watched his mother be dependent on drugs and being physically assaulted by the dad. I mean, I haven't gone through anything close to that, so I have no ability to imagine it. But when I try to, I of course feel really sad for a little boy who had to witness it and be a part of it. And of course you see with his own children, he kind of imposed something similar when he was, beating and threatening the life of the mother of his children in front of his children. So now they get to have a little memento of what it was like that Floyd went through. Well, how nice for them.
Yeah.
I'm sure Floyd, the mother of Floyd's 3 kids, Josie Harris, made a point to say, Floyd has a daughter how would he feel about that daughter growing up to get in a relationship with somebody like Floyd Jr., who feels totally fine beating her up? And if he beats her up, maybe he buys her off with a car or whatever. And Floyd Jr. bought off his son with like a Bentley golf cart or something. The kid's too young to drive, but it's all just so sickening and repulsive, frankly.
It really is, and again, the irony, trying to get into Floyd's psyche, does he have his father in the ring in the biggest fight of his career to kind of almost look at him like, see, Dad, I am a winner. See, Dad, I'm successful. Look at me. And maybe not even to get his advice because he's not really going to be so helpful. I mean, Floyd Sr. seems to me so crazy and dumb. I think he really thinks he could beat up his son in a fight. I think he really believes that. What do you think?
Well, I think the X factor in this fight, and I'm only going to break it on Israel Sports Radio,
all right,
is that David Miscavige is going to be in the front row. He spent $350,000 to attend this fight because Floyd is making this grand announcement that after he leaves boxing, he is taking over the place of Tom Cruise. He's stage 9 in Scientology, and he has actually been, I mean, I can't believe I'm disclosing this. He has spent time with Xenu on 2 separate weekends for his training camp, and the fight is being dedicated to Xenu.
Wait, are you telling a joke, or is this is real?
No, it's a complete joke. I'm just
okay.
having some fun.
Oh, okay.
But I have been speculating about who would be the front row, and the 2 number 1 people that I've heard would be David Miscavige showing up in the front row, or Vladimir Putin.
Wow. Is Putin?
No, I don't think this is going to happen. I'm just saying these would be the most fun from my point of view.
Oh, for sure. Now you'll be attending the fight through your Jew Sports Radio badge, or how you get in exactly?
Well, whether or not I do have a credential for Jew Sports Radio, I am always representing Jew Radio in my heart, obviously. A living, breathing, inspiring example of the Zionist conspiracy, if ever there was one. So, yeah.
Indeed. Again, my guest is Brin-Jonathan Butler. A few more minutes we have with you. We talked a little everything, talked psychology, Floyd's domestic violence, the fight, the money. Well, we actually didn't talk so much specifically of the fight. We were talking about legacy, but going into this fight, there was an interesting piece with Max Kellerman talking about the 5 opponents that both Floyd and Manny have faced, the 5 common opponents. They seem to all lean towards Floyd winning. And I guess my perception is most people think Floyd will win, but most people want Manny Pacquiao to win. Is that what you've been observing in Vegas? I know that you personally want Pacquiao to win. Is that what most people in the area, the Las Vegas area, seem to want to happen?
Yeah, I think most people see it as a decision. Pretty, 7 rounds to 5 Floyd decision. Floyd doing what Floyd does best, finding a way to win.